Hi everybody, I'm here in my backyard again, my favorite place to do my vlog. I'm doing a vlog today. I had a really interesting conversation with a friend of mine, also known as K. Lakshmi. You can follow her Facebook page. She's got some very interesting posts, and I was lamenting or reflecting on International Yoga Day, which also falls on the same day as National Aboriginal Day, which is kind of hard because one always gets a little more play than the other, and everybody knew it was Yoga Day but didn't know it was National Aboriginal Day yesterday. So it got me thinking a lot about culture and race. And if you're friends with me on my personal page, you know that I'm very political on my personal page, and I talk a lot about issues of race and gender and exclusion, and I talk about it here from the perspective of yoga. So I'm teaching a course with Amber Carnes, Yoga for All, and it's a 5-week course that we're in the midst of right now. We're in module 2, and module 1 was about ahimsa and self-reflection. And as a person of color, I am constantly in self-reflection. I'm constantly observing how the world perceives me, what kind of judgments get placed on me, the reactions I get when I go to stores with my kids and I'm not wearing a wedding ring, and the judgments that people make about me. And for the record, I don't wear my wedding ring because I do a lot of headstanding and it just hurts and I'm afraid I'm going to lose it, but it always ends up being some kind of judgment I notice, and I always have been like that, noticing the world around me. And recently I started reading the book of Negroes, which is done by the Canadian author Lawrence Hill, and he grew up in my hometown. He's a little bit older than me, but he talks a lot about race and issues of race in Canada, and I think we don't hear a lot about that. You know, we see a lot of what's going on in the States, we see a lot of the police brutality and the inequality that goes on in the States, but we don't often hear about what goes on in Canada, which I think is interesting because I think it's made us smug as Canadians around race. We think that we're living in some kind of post-racial society, and we think what goes on in the States doesn't go on here. It does, but on a lesser scale. Canada has the 10th of the population of the United States. So the incidents of police brutality are going to be different. The stats are going to be different. And know that we have these issues of race and gender right here in Canada, even though we tend to be a little bit more liberal. I think we're just maybe a little bit passive about how we deal with our with race issues, but as North Americans, we just generally don't like to have these uncomfortable conversations. So back to my story. So I was reading the book of Negroes, and I found out about Black Americans in the 1800s and the 1900s coming from the States to Canada for freedom. And a lot of Black Americans of African descent wound up in Nova Scotia. And did you know, as a Canadian, born and raised, grew up in the school system, we were never taught about this? I didn't know there were Black people in Nova Scotia till I actually met a person from Nova Scotia, and I was surprised by that. I also am constantly investigating why people of color, Black people in particular, think of their history as only slavery. We never look past that. We think our history begins with slavery, but it doesn't. You know, the first slaves were brought to North America in the early 1600s, you know. So before that, we had a history, and we had a history of civilization, of language, of mathematics, and none of us are taught that as a culture. And I asked on my personal Facebook page, why do you think that's so? And the reaction I got there, it's because of racism. Our history isn't considered important enough to be taught in schools. Now, there's a school here in Windsor that actually has a course that teaches Black people about their heritage in Canada as Black Canadians. Now, my story is a little bit different because my parents are from Barbados, and I'm the product of immigrant parents from Barbados, but my history is also steeped in slavery. The country to the east of Barbados is Africa. There's nothing between Barbados and Africa. So a lot of the slaves that were brought to work the sugar plantations in Barbados are from the Gold Coast of Africa. So that's where my family is from, and my family is a product of slavery. I would like it if moving forward in our culture that we maybe aren't defined by that particular history, that we can move and look at what happened prior to that so that people can have pride in who they are, because our legacy is important and what we brought to the table is important, not to mention the contributions to North American culture and society that people of color have made need to be recognized. But to not recognize our history as beginning at slavery, that we had a history prior to that, and educating ourselves on that. Lately, I've been looking a lot at Kemetic yoga, which which has a history for people of color, for Black people, particularly because there are pictures of yogic postures in the pyramids that, you know, predates what we know yoga today. So every ancient civilization has a spiritual practice similar to yoga that might not be called yoga, but it really got me thinking about what it is yoga is. And it always comes up when I teach a teacher training. So this is going to be an interesting project for my 200-hour teacher training that's starting next week. That's going to be an interesting conversation about the history of yoga. But I think it's really important for people of color to have a frame of reference outside of slavery. Love to hear your thoughts. Keeping in mind, I'm looking for compassionate self-study and critiquing that is compassionate. If you're gonna be a jackass on my Facebook page, I'll kick you out. This is my house and I don't have to tolerate garbage. So know this, but if you have something interesting and intelligent to say on this topic, I would love to hear it, because I'm constantly thinking about this stuff. Okay, thanks for tuning in, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next video. Namaste.